I'm a fan of Krista Tippett's award-winning podcast and radio show On Being. In it, she interviews a variety of people of faith, asking them about the animating questions of their life. She asks the same questions that we ask here. What does it mean to be human? What does our creatureliness have to do with worshiping God? And how do we seek to embody our faith? And she begins virtually every single interview asking her guests this question: what is the spiritual and religious background of your childhood? So we pose that question to Miriam, the prophet, priest, musician, and teacher. And of course, she's also Moses and Aaron's sister. Last week, we imagined Miriam, one of those 3 women gathered in community to save the baby boy Moses from the Pharaoh's murderous decree. After Moses' mother has done everything possible to save her child, it is Miriam who hides in the reeds and keeps watch. And then when the Egyptian princess, comes, she poses a question to that princess to save the child Moses. Shall I go and call for you, a woman nursing from the Hebrews, so that she will nurse for you your child? This "for you" that Miriam proposes brings together 2 sets of dynamically different people to work together for the common interest, all for the purpose of saving this child and perhaps all of the Israelite children. As we talked about last week, this is Miriam's entry into social justice work. This is Miriam's spiritual and religious background of her childhood. But if we revisit Exodus 2, you'll notice that Miriam's name is never mentioned. She's called Moses' sister, which is how we know it's her. She isn't even called the daughter. It's as if her very presence, except when it'd be impossible to avoid mentioning her, has become redacted from the text. It seems as though some of those ancient scholars were trying to edit her out. So as you listen today, perhaps you'll think in your mind, and there are so many, who have we in modern and present history tried to edit out? Or who do we just selectively forget? And despite all of those attempts to edit those voices out, how and why do those voices emerge? Why do those voices shine through? So for 13 chapters, we hear nothing from Miriam, nothing during the plagues, the exodus from Egypt, or the actual crossing of the Red Sea. And then the people have come to the other side, and that was the first part of the text that I read. The people have come to their freedom, they rejoice, and it's beautiful. But the curious thing is Moses, and we remember that he's the one who didn't want to be the public speaker, becomes the musical leader for all of the Israelites. And Moses sang this song to the Lord. It's a poem about the power of God leading God's people into freedom. And it concludes in verse 18, "The Lord will reign forever and ever." It's an exclamation of triumph. The poem should come to an end, but it doesn't. We're given another ending, and it is sort of an awkward one. So if I read verse 19, it's as though it's trying to summarize all of the Israelite struggle, as if it's trying to go back in time. It feels like someone has actually been sort of messing with the text. It's as though someone's trying to hide another voice that's trying to shine through. So verses 20 and 21, the ones I want you to remember today. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine, and with all the women went out with the tambourines and with dancing. So we asked 2 questions. First, why these 2 endings? They don't work together. In fact, as Old Testament scholar Phyllis Tribble notes, they stand in tension, not in tandem. The first 18 verses attributed to Moses so overpower this song of Miriam, we wonder, were we even given the second ending? Why bother to include this song? And then, why is Moses, the inarticulate one, given the longer speech? As we ask those questions and we dig a little deeper, scholars have since come to believe that in an effort to elevate Moses, they suppress Miriam. And the bulk of Miriam's song, which is probably verses 1 through 21, most of it was given to Moses. Miriam just gets the 2 at the end. Rather than silencing Miriam, though, these 2 endings, as you hear, bring up more questions. Including 2 disjointed endings, the story gives a glimmer of an internal critique within the text, as if there were 2 communities trying to both get their voices to shine through. As if the women are still there saying, yes, we were at the beginning and we were at the end of the Exodus story. These are the people who are traditionally oppressed. It's Miriam, who we first see as a child and then as an adult, providing the continuity of God's presence all along. But Miriam's role as prophet, priest, and teacher doesn't end there. Her story gets even more complicated. Numbers 12, and you should read this at some time. The people have been on this wilderness journey. We're in Numbers now, we're in the next book. They aren't happy, there's a power struggle. Miriam enters into this struggle, and for the first time, for some reason, she isn't surrounded by her normal community of women. We don't know why. Aaron, her brother, who we usually presume to be the priest, the one in charge, instead he takes a supporting role in this one. And for some reason, Miriam and Aaron come into some sort of argument with Moses. We aren't actually sure what this argument is about. Perhaps it's just 3 siblings having an argument. Perhaps they're just having a really bad day. Miriam says some stuff about Moses' wife. She shouldn't have said these things, but she said them. She calls Moses' wife a Cushite. So we're not quite sure if she's talking about Zipporah, Moses' wife who we've met, or perhaps there's another woman, which is a problem, perhaps. We aren't sure if Miriam is engaging in a racist attack, as a Cushite might suggest black skin, but in other translations it also suggests beauty. So we really aren't quite sure what they're arguing about. But the whole incident is unclear. But what is clear is that Miriam made some fatally bad decisions here. And according to the initial priestly account, God sides against Miriam and with Moses. Miriam becomes leprous, skin as white as snow. Aaron defends his sister. Moses defends his sister. There's a conflict between them, but the sibling bond isn't broken. She's unclean, so she must remain out of the camp for 7 days. They're in the midst of the journey. They're really trying to get out of the wilderness. The thing that would have made sense would be to leave her there. But the curious thing is the people don't want to leave. They wait in the desert for 7 days, and it could have been longer. They insist on waiting for her. 7 days later, Miriam is verified that she is clean. She can come back with a group, but she never fully recovers. From this point onward, she is silent, so she sort of vanishes into the background. For whatever reason, and we're not really quite sure why, as Old Testament scholars have said, Miriam was somehow a threat to the early establishment in Israel. Her voice is largely silenced. The tradition tries to bury her in disgrace. But then after Miriam dies, the waters dry up. It's as if all of nature, led by God, is mourning over Miriam. Nature can't be held in. God can't be held in. And while Miriam's story is largely silenced by the priest, later in the prophets, we hear of her again. Micah 6:4. For I brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And these come just before the words we treasure, which are outside. What does the Lord require you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Miriam is part of that Trinity lifted up doing just that. In the Jewish Midrash, the ancient commentary on the biblical text, they have a whole story based on Miriam what the children might be reading. They start from her early childhood years, even before Moses was born, all the way to her death. It goes to the tradition of Miriam's well, the well that provided the Israelites water for the journey. It's a well that reminds us of Miriam's vitality. And then you think of all the people that are named Miriam. You think of all of the social services organizations in this world that have Miriam's name attached to it, including Miriam's Kitchen here in DC. Despite efforts of those editors, of power players, of people trying to edit her out of history, Miriam lives on. So why does she survive? What attracts us to her, to Miriam? So I am attracted to her by her realness. I love that she had her ups and downs, that she had her moments of risking her life for God's justice, but also that she made this fatal error in judgment. I'm attracted to her because through it all and everything in between, she embodies faith. She embodies this as a priest, a prophet, a musician, a dancer. So, I put on my other hat, my Christian education hat. I organize Sunday school, so you should know this. As we roll towards the end of August, I've been thinking about Sunday school more, recruiting teachers, putting together rosters. But I've been actually thinking about how do we pass on our faith to our children? What's the best way to do it? Okay, so there's a variety of ways, and I think these are all good. We can memorize scripture, those words that we call upon in our hour of need. We can learn the Bible stories so they become friends, not just some ancient relic. We can live into the theology. We can engage in Christian service, and those are all good. But the single most important thing that study after study after study says that the really only effective way to pass on your faith to children and youth, and really anyone who you want to pass on your faith to, is to witness parents and other people in the faith community, the church, embodying faith outside of time and worship on Sundays, to live out faith in the rest of life from the Monday to Saturday and the afternoon on Sunday. The only way to pass on faith is to see a true and honest faith, a lived faith, a faith that shows all those real doubts, the questions, the why me, is this, why did this happen to me this way? The faith that testifies to the struggle of justice because that faith was at the center of that struggle. The faith that shows those cracked edges, those times when our own decisions are so fatally flawed, and yet in the midst of our own mistakes, we're punished perhaps, but not abandoned by God. This is the faith that stands up and says, I'm worth it, despite being told a zillion messages to the contrary. It's a faith that starts the size of a mustard seed or the starter of the yeast of bread. It's a faith that we see in Miriam, the faith that's real and absolutely present. It's a faith that shines through strongest in her dance. Dancing in worship, dancing as a way of worship, fully and free. And during her song, we see the women celebrating the freedom that they've been given for the first time, the freedom over their bodies, to move, to be, to embody faith in God. I imagine, as I did with the children, Miriam waving her tambourine, waving it really loud and strong without inhibitions, raising her hands without fear. I imagine her whole body surging and moving, expressive and emotional with so much intensity, it feels as though she might be flying. And I also have to believe that given her story, she also danced into the despair. A slower, more lumbering dance, a dance when the whole body hangs, bent so deeply that it feels as though the body will break. But then in the dance, it doesn't. It's a dance of faith in Miriam's dance, she is held up, and she's held up by those waters of faith that honor her. Those waters dance too, I imagine them, sometimes surging and chaotic, dangerous or fearful, a marker of disaster like we see in Louisiana. But then there's community in that dance, and people coming together and neighbors helping each other. And then suddenly there's a change in the dance that it's so abrupt that we might not even miss it. A shift when the waters recede and the calmness comes. Sometimes that moment goes unnoticed, but I think it's captured in the dance of the waters that give hope, that look to a time of overflowing possibility, holding her in grace. The waters that dance uninhibited, fully connected, and wildly passionate, fully embodied love. Amen.